I remember that night like a photograph burned into my skin. December in Vermont has a way of slicing through your coat no matter how thick it is. I was sitting on the back porch wrapped in my old gray sweater, the one that smelled faintly of cedar and winter. Frost spread across the railing and my breath rose in small white clouds. Inside, the dinner had ended. They laughed, they drank, they toasted to their bright future while I sat at the edge of the table like furniture. I left quietly before anyone even noticed. When the door creaked open behind me, I knew it was Tara. She always carried herself like the house belonged to her, like she owned the air around us. The smell of cheap red wine hit me first. She leaned against the railing, swaying slightly, her eyes sharp and cold despite the alcohol. "Look at you, broken little Harper, sitting here like a statue." I kept my eyes on the dark tree line. If I ignored her, maybe she would stumble back inside. But Tara thrived on silence. She fed on it. I heard the sound of her boots dragging against the wood, each step a dull thud that grew closer. My fingers curled around the armrest of the chair. My left leg ached the way it always did when it was this cold. She stopped right in front of me, close enough that I could see the shine of wine on her lips. She tilted her head and smiled. It was the kind of smile that belongs to someone who has never paid a price for anything. Her foot struck the side of my leg. Not a playful tap, a kick meant to hurt. A violent burst of pain shot up through my thigh and lower back. My body jerked sideways. I slid off the chair and slammed into the porch floor. My palms scraped against the wood. My elbow banged against the step. I gasped. The sound that came out of me was not a scream, but the sharp inhale of someone who has been here before. She bent down, her shadow stretching over me, and I saw pure satisfaction in her eyes. Then she grabbed the wheelchair behind me and shoved it forward. It rolled to the edge of the porch and fell onto the frozen ground below with a hard, metallic crash. She laughed, the kind of laugh that stays in your bones long after it fades from your ears. "You should have stayed upstairs. Nobody wants you here, Harper, not even your dead mom." I froze. She pulled something out of her pocket. A photograph. It was the one of my mother smiling at the beach, the one I kept tucked in the small pocket of the chair. My throat tightened. Tara ripped the photograph in half, slowly making sure I heard every tear. The pieces floated down like snow and vanished into the darkness. My lips split under the pressure of my teeth. Blood filled my mouth. The cold seeped into my jeans. The pain grew heavier. It felt like it was reaching inside me, wrapping itself around every nerve. The door opened. Linda stepped out, her hair still perfectly brushed, sweater immaculate. She looked at me on the floor. She looked at Tara standing over me, and then she turned around and walked back inside. No words, no hesitation. The door closed with a soft click. That sound was colder than the night. Snow began to fall in soft flakes, landing on the porch and in my hair. The porch light threw a pale glow over everything, making the world look quiet and cruel. Tara's footsteps faded as she walked back inside, satisfied with the damage she had done. I stared at the torn pieces of my mother's face scattered in the snow. My hands trembled, but I stayed on the floor. I had screamed before. It never changed anything. This time, I let silence cover me like a blanket. I pressed my hands against the porch and steadied my breathing. The pain was there, sharp and real, but beneath it was something different, something steady. I whispered to myself so quietly only the wind could hear. Silence isn't weakness. Not tonight. I stayed there until my breath evened out. The snow kept falling. The ache in my leg pulsed like a drum, but I kept my jaw clenched. I would remember every second of this moment. Before I tell you what happened the next morning, tell me where you're watching from and subscribe, because sometimes silence isn't weakness. It is the calm before a storm. I was not born into this house. That is something Tara never lets me forget. When I was 14, my mother died in a car accident on a rainy night. She had been picking me up from a late school rehearsal. The last thing I remember is the sound of her voice humming along with the radio, then metal twisting and glass shattering. After that, it was just silence and a hospital ceiling. She was gone before I even opened my eyes. My father tried. He really did at first. But grief has a way of rotting people from the inside. 2 years later, he remarried Linda. She walked into our lives like she was taking over a company. Polished, careful, the kind of woman who never raised her voice because she never needed to. She had money from a previous marriage and a daughter of her own. Tara was already everything I wasn't. She was tall, athletic, perfect posture, perfect hair, perfect smile. She walked through high school like it was built for her. I moved through hallways like a shadow, quiet, awkward, carrying the weight of someone who had already lost too much. When the accident that broke my leg happened, I was 19. It was my own car this time. A drunk driver crossed the yellow line. I survived, but my body didn't come back the same. Months of surgeries, rods, and plates and physical therapy left me with a leg that would never fully support me again. That was the beginning of Tara's favorite nickname for me, Broken. She said it like a truth carved into stone. Linda never corrected her. My father did at first, but after he got sick, everything softened around him. He lost energy to fight. I started using a wheelchair more often during winter. Vermont winters are brutal on old injuries. Tara found that funny. She liked to whisper things under her breath when she passed by me, things like pity case or dead weight. She never said it loud enough for outsiders to hear, only me, only where it mattered. Linda watched it happen for years. She never defended me. She preferred to act like none of it existed. To her, I was a guest she tolerated out of politeness, a burden attached to my father's name. When he passed away 2 years ago, she stopped pretending altogether. The day after the funeral, she walked into the living room still wearing black and said the words that burned through me like acid. "This is our house now." I remember the smell of the coffee she was holding, the calmness in her voice. She said it like she was announcing the weather. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. My father left a will, and according to it, 60% of the house belonged to me. He wanted me to have security, a place where I could live without fear. Linda hated that. She smiled at me and said it didn't matter that I could live here as long as I behaved, as long as I didn't get in the way. Tara, of course, took that as permission to do whatever she pleased. Every year since then, the house grew smaller for me. They changed the furniture without asking. They moved my mother's photographs into the attic. Tara laughed when she saw me look for them. "Dead people shouldn't decorate the living room," she said. They started hosting parties in the living room my father and I used to decorate together at Christmas. They brought their friends. They pretended I wasn't there. They made jokes about Florida and fresh starts, about how they would sell this old house and finally live the life they deserved. I sat quietly in the corner. To them, I was the background noise. I always thought the cruelty would stay in words, but cruelty grows when no one stops it. When Tara kicked me that night, something inside me cracked, but not the way she wanted. It wasn't fear. It wasn't defeat. It was something colder, sharper, a realization that I had been giving away the last thing I had, my voice, my right to stand my ground. I remembered the hospital room after the car accident, the sterile white walls, the way nurses spoke softly like I was something fragile. I had learned to swallow pain in silence because it made other people comfortable. That habit had followed me all my life, and Tara had been feeding on it. She saw silence as weakness. Linda saw it as consent. But that night, as the snow fell and the photograph of my mother lay ripped in the dark, I knew something had changed. My father once told me long before the world shifted that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to stop bending. It's the steady voice in your head that says no more. I had been quiet for years. I had been bending so long I forgot what standing felt like, but not anymore. I remembered being 10 years old and helping my mother hang garlands in the hallway. She told me back then, "This house will always feel like home if you keep a piece of yourself here." I had buried that memory deep under the noise of Tara's laughter and Linda's sharp smiles. But that night it came back like a flame flickering in the dark. I realized I was not just a guest in this house. I was an heir, a rightful owner, and I was done letting them erase me. Tara may have thought of me as broken, but she never understood that broken things can cut just as deep. My silence had protected her for too long. Now it would protect me. The house smelled like pine and cheap wine. Somewhere inside, they were laughing again, already forgetting the cruelty they left on the porch. But I was not going to forget. The bruises on my leg would heal, but this memory was going to stay exactly where it belonged, at the beginning of their end. The house was silent after midnight, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until you hear nothing but the sound of your own heartbeat. I sat on the floor of my bedroom with my back against the wall, my injured leg stretched out in front of me. The pain had dulled into a steady throbbing ache. I pressed my fingertips against the bruised skin and exhaled slowly, watching the way the moonlight spilled through the window across the wooden floor. It was the same house I had grown up in, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. Every wall carried someone else's laughter. Every corner smelled like a life I didn't belong to. But beneath all of that, something inside me had started to shift. I reached for the bottom drawer of my dresser. It was stiff from the cold, and I had to pull hard to make it open. Inside was the file my father left me wrapped carefully in an old manila folder. I had not touched it since the week of his funeral. I had kept it hidden as if ignoring it would make everything less real. The edges were slightly frayed from years of sitting there, but the paper inside was clean and sharp. I laid it out on the floor like a weapon. The official seal on the will stared back at me. I traced my finger over my father's name, remembering his handwriting, the way he always signed things slowly and precisely. He had thought about everything, every possibility, even the day when he would not be here to protect me. I could hear his voice in my head, calm and steady. "This house is yours too, Harper. No one can take it from you." At the time, I believed him. Then, Linda and Tara chipped away at those words piece by piece until they felt like a fairy tale. But they were not a fairy tale. They were legal. They were binding. They were real. I pushed myself up to my knees and limped to the mirror. The reflection that stared back at me was pale, my hair messy, the side of my face slightly swollen from the fall. A faint bruise was already blooming near my cheekbone. My lip was split. For years I had hated mirrors because they showed me the parts of me that Tara loved to target, but tonight was different. I stared at myself not like a victim, but like someone trying to memorize every detail of the moment before something irreversible happens. This wasn't about pity. This was about reclaiming what was mine. I touched the bruise on my cheek and whispered, "If they want a war, I'll give them something they'll never forget." The words came out steady, almost too calm, like they had been sitting inside me for years, waiting for the right night to be spoken aloud. I turned back to the folder. Page after page detailed my father's estate, the division of assets, the signatures. 60% ownership of the house was mine. It was all right there. I wasn't the guest. They were. I thought about all the nights Tara had walked past me with that smirk, all the times Linda acted like my existence was a mistake. Every time I stayed quiet, I gave them permission to believe it. I thought about the photograph of my mother torn in half. The sound of that paper tearing still rang in my head. That photograph wasn't just a picture. It was everything she left behind, and Tara crushed it without a blink. I could still hear the way she laughed. That laugh was the last thing she would ever get away with. My phone buzzed softly on the nightstand, a message from an old friend. I ignored it. I didn't need anyone else in this moment. This was between me and the storm I was about to unleash. I walked to the window and looked out at the yard. The wheelchair lay half buried in fresh snow, tilted awkwardly near the fence. It looked like a monument to everything they thought they could do to me without consequence. I pressed my palm against the cold glass. My mother always said silence is a dangerous thing when it belongs to someone who finally decides they've had enough. Tara thought silence made me weak. She was about to learn silence can be the sharpest blade. I sat down at the desk with the folder in front of me and opened my laptop. I began typing out a list. Everything they had said, everything they had done, every time Tara had crossed a line, every date I could remember. It was methodical cold, not emotional. I wasn't doing this because I wanted their apology. I didn't need it. I was doing this to build something they couldn't break with their words. Evidence. I organized the documents, scanned the will, and emailed my father's lawyer to request a meeting. The message was simple. I need to enforce my rights. She would understand what that meant. She had known my father for years. By the time the email was sent, it was past 2 in the morning. I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion pulling at me, but under the exhaustion was something fierce. Determination. For years, I let this house crush me slowly, but from now on, every wall would remember my name. I walked over to the bed, but I didn't lie down. I stood there staring at the empty space where my mother's photograph used to be tucked in the pocket of the chair. My mother built this house with love. Linda and Tara tried to turn it into a weapon, but I was done letting them use my silence as permission. I whispered into the dark, "Tomorrow, everything changes." And for the first time in years, the words didn't feel like a wish. They felt like a promise. The morning light slid through the blinds like a thin blade, soft but sharp. I woke up early, long before Linda's heels would start clicking across the hallway or Tara's music would rattle the kitchen walls. My leg ached, but the pain had changed. It was no longer just a reminder of what I had lost. It was a steady pulse, like the drumbeat of something about to begin. I moved slowly to the window and looked down at the wheelchair lying in the snow. The metal was frosted over the handles, dusted in white, like a silent witness to everything that had happened the night before. I could almost hear Tara's laugh echoing in my head, but this time it didn't pierce me the way it usually did. It hardened something inside me. I made coffee, quietly careful not to wake anyone. The smell filled the kitchen warm and bitter. For years, this house had never really been mine. But today, I moved through it with a different weight in my steps. Not as a guest. Not as someone who should be grateful to stay. As the owner. The rightful one. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and my father's folder spread out in front of me. My hand brushed over the legal papers. The ink on those signatures was more powerful than Tara's cruelty or Linda's arrogance. They could insult me, push me, erase me from photos, but they could not erase a legal fact. I opened my browser and started searching for mini cameras. Discreet ones, the kind that didn't make noise or flash lights. I placed an order for same-day delivery. It wasn't about revenge, it was about control. For years they had moved around this house like they owned it. Now I would make sure every corner remembered the truth. By the time the sun climbed higher, I had already mapped out the angles in my head. The living room near the mantel, the kitchen facing the table, the hallway outside my bedroom door. I wasn't going to let their whispers stay whispers anymore. Around 8:30, I heard Linda's bedroom door open. The sound of her steps was as familiar as the ticking of a clock. She entered the kitchen wearing a robe and that thin smile she used whenever she wanted to pretend she cared. "You're up early," she said, her tone wrapped in polite condescension. I nodded without looking up. She didn't like silence. She liked power. When I didn't give her attention, she lost her footing. About last night, she continued reaching for a mug. "You know how Tara can get after a little wine. You shouldn't take things so seriously." I stared at the table. She didn't apologize. She never did. She didn't even acknowledge what happened. That was the game. Pretend the cruelty didn't exist so it would rot quietly inside me. But not anymore. I simply said I'll take care of it and nothing more. She frowned, confused by the calmness in my voice. For years, my silence had come with a slump in my shoulders and lowered eyes. Not today. Tara stumbled into the kitchen 20 minutes later, hair messy, wearing one of her oversized hoodies. She smirked when she saw me at the table. That smirk used to make my stomach twist. Now, it just reminded me why I was done. "Morning, broken girl," she said, reaching for cereal. Linda didn't even blink. I didn't flinch. I didn't respond. I let the silence stretch so thin it cut the air between us. Tara shifted uncomfortably. She liked when I broke down, not when I stayed still. "What?" she snapped. I smiled slightly, a smile I had practiced in the mirror a few hours earlier. Calm, controlled, predictable to no one but me. Nothing, I said softly, and that was enough to make her eyes narrow. After they left for the morning errands, the house was mine. I set up the cameras carefully, one in the corner of the living room near the clock, one above the cabinet facing the kitchen table, one at the hallway angle where Tara usually liked to corner me with her insults. I tested the feed on my laptop. Crystal clear. For the first time in years, this house would see what I saw. This wasn't impulsive rage. It was quiet, methodical power. I called my father's lawyer. Her voice was warm but firm, the kind of voice that didn't ask unnecessary questions. "Harper," She said I wondered when you'd call. I told her everything. Not the bruises, not the tears, just the facts, the will, the threats, the talk of selling the house. She didn't need drama to understand the weight of what I was saying. We can file a petition to freeze any transfer of ownership, she said. That house is partly yours, and they cannot sell or alter it without your consent. If they try, they'll face legal consequences. I thanked her and set a meeting for the following day. When I hung up, I felt the kind of silence that wasn't heavy anymore. It was sharp, controlled. My silence had always protected them. Now it protected me. In the afternoon, I cleaned the porch. I picked up the wheelchair from the snow, wiped it down, fixed the bent armrest. Every movement was steady and slow. It wasn't just metal. It was a part of me they had tried to break. But I wasn't broken. Not anymore. When Tara returned that evening, she noticed the chair parked neatly back at the door. She paused for a second like she expected me to avoid eye contact. Instead, I looked straight at her. No words. Just a quiet certainty that unsettled her. She muttered something under her breath and walked away. I sat back on the porch later that night, the air sharp against my skin, the cameras silently watching. I could feel the storm building. They thought I was weak because I never shouted, but storms don't always start with thunder. Sometimes they start with a whisper that no one listens to, and by the time they hear it, it's already too late. Tomorrow they would find out that silence can be a weapon, and it was finally in my hands. The house changed its temperature without anyone saying a word. That was the first sign. It was the kind of tension you could feel under your skin, like air tightening before a storm. I spent the following days moving through rooms I had once avoided, touching walls I had once tried to disappear behind. Every step I took was deliberate. I didn't hide. I didn't flinch when Tara passed me in the hallway, and that alone was enough to unsettle her. She didn't know what to do with my silence now that it no longer bent for her. The cameras worked exactly as planned. I spent nights reviewing their footage, watching every sneer, every whispered insult. Tara didn't know they were recording. Linda didn't either. It was like seeing the truth printed in black ink. No more doubt. No more, maybe I overreacted. I had proof now. The legal documents were organized in a folder on my laptop and in a physical binder I kept under my bed. Every email from my lawyer was a quiet drumbeat toward something bigger. I didn't tell anyone about the case. Not my old friends, not neighbors. Silence had always been their weapon, but now it was mine. The morning after I filed the first set of documents to freeze any sale of the house, Tara started to show cracks. She slammed doors louder. She whispered more cruelly when she thought no one was listening. At breakfast, she leaned against the counter while Linda scrolled through her tablet. When we sell this place, Tara said, I'm going to get the hell out of this boring town. Florida, maybe. Somewhere warm. Somewhere without broken people haunting the porch. Linda didn't look up. She laughed quietly. They talked about beachfront condos like I wasn't sitting 10 feet away drinking my coffee. Tara turned her head just enough for me to catch the smirk. Not that she'll have any say in it, she added, and Linda's laugh grew louder. I didn't look away this time. I let her see me looking. I let her see the calm that terrified her. She expected a reaction. Instead, she got quiet steel. That made her nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. The next night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. Tara's voice was lower than usual. She's acting weird, like she knows something. Linda's reply was sharper. She doesn't know anything, and even if she does, she can't stop us. She has nothing. They didn't know how wrong they were. I walked down the hallway slowly, my crutch pressing against the floor in steady rhythm. When I stepped into the kitchen, Tara froze for half a second. Linda forced a smile. We were just talking about the open house, she said. It'll be beautiful. People will line up for this place. I nodded once, then reached for a glass of water and left. That was the moment I knew they were feeling the pressure. They were building a fantasy and they needed me to stay quiet for it to hold. But I wasn't quiet anymore. That night, Tara knocked on my door. She had never done that before. What do you want? I asked without opening. To talk, she said, but her voice gave away the tension she tried to hide. I opened just enough for her to see my face. Her hands were stuffed into the pocket of her hoodie. I don't know what your problem is lately, but it's starting to get on my nerves, she snapped. You think this house is yours? You think Dad left it to you out of love. He felt sorry for you. Her words landed like they always did, sharp and heavy, but this time they didn't cut. They confirmed everything I already knew about the poison she carried. Go to bed, Tara, I said softly. She glared at me like she was trying to figure out how to get under my skin. But my silence didn't leave her any room. She left muttering curses under her breath. The cameras caught all of it. The next day, she escalated. At dinner, she tossed a napkin into my lap and said loudly, "Make yourself useful for once. Clean something." Linda chuckled, swirling her wine. In the past, I would have stayed frozen. This time, I lifted the napkin slowly, placed it on the table, and said, "You'll clean your own mess." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Linda's eyes narrowed. Tara flushed. She wasn't used to me talking back. Not like that. That night I reviewed the footage again. Every insult, every threat. I saved it in 2 places, then sent a copy to my lawyer. No emotion, just evidence. Each file was a quiet nail sealing their fate. By the end of the week, they started talking about the house like it was already sold. Linda ordered brochures. Tara looked at listings in Florida. They sat in the living room with glasses of wine, laughing about real estate agents, while I sat in the kitchen doorway listening. "I can't wait to be out of this cold dump," Tara said. "She can rot here for all I care." Linda didn't even try to correct her. I held my coffee mug tighter. I didn't interrupt. They didn't know the paperwork to block the sale had already been processed. They didn't know they had been legally cornered. What they did know was that I wasn't reacting anymore, and that made them uneasy. One evening, Tara followed me out to the porch. The snow had hardened into ice on the steps. She leaned against the railing, that same spot where she had kicked me. "You think you're clever," she said. "I see the way you look at us, like you're planning something." I met her eyes. "Maybe I am," I said. Her jaw tightened. "Don't play games with me, Harper. You'll lose." I didn't say another word. She hated that. She shoved past me as she went back inside, her shoulder brushing mine harder than necessary. I didn't stumble. She wasn't expecting that. It rattled her. Linda started asking questions at breakfast. "Why have you been so quiet lately?" she asked, stirring her tea. "It's unsettling." She meant she missed the version of me who made their cruelty easier. I smiled, just enough to make her uncomfortable. "I'm just watching," I said. "That's worse," she muttered, but I heard it. They were cornered and they didn't even know it yet. The night before the storm broke, I stood in my room looking at the snow-covered yard through the window. The house felt different, like it was waiting too. I had prepared everything. The footage, the legal papers, the meeting with the lawyer. The next step would change everything. They thought they were playing a private game where they could rewrite the story however they wanted. But I was the one holding the ending. The pressure was building not just in their world, but inside mine. But mine was quiet, sharp, controlled. Theirs was loud, and soon it would crack wide open. The day I walked into my lawyer's office, the sky was gray and heavy with snow. It was the kind of morning that made the world quiet, as if everything was holding its breath. I sat across from her at a mahogany desk that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books. Her name was Rebecca, and she had known my father for years. She didn't need a long explanation. I slid the folder across the desk. It contained everything: the will, the property deeds, and the first batch of footage from the cameras. She opened the file and her face hardened with quiet focus. "They've been planning to sell without your consent," she said calmly. I nodded. She flipped through the papers like someone sorting puzzle pieces she had seen before. "They can't do that," she said, tapping the will with her pen. "Legally, you own 60%. They can't transfer, sell, or modify this property without your approval. We can file an injunction to freeze the property immediately." Her tone was matter-of-fact, efficient, sharp. It was the sound of a door closing behind Linda and Tara without them even knowing. She drafted the petition right there as snow tapped softly against the window. I signed my name at the bottom of the documents, my hands steady. For the first time in years, my name felt powerful on paper. It was more than ink. It was a boundary they could not cross. "We'll have the court order served this afternoon," she said. "They'll be notified by email and physical delivery. Once this is filed, they won't be able to touch the house. If they try, they'll face contempt charges." When I left her office, the snow crunched under my boots. The cold air burned in my lungs, but it felt clean. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was mine. When I got home, Tara and Linda were sitting in the living room with mugs of coffee, flipping through a stack of brochures from real estate agents. Their laughter floated through the house like a bad melody. They didn't even look at me when I walked in. Tara was talking about beaches in Miami. Linda was nodding along, pretending she already owned the world. When the email notification came through on Linda's tablet, I saw the way her face changed. One second she was smiling, the next her jaw stiffened. She read the message again slower, like she couldn't believe it. Tara leaned over her shoulder. "What's that?" she asked. Linda didn't answer right away. Her knuckles went wide around the tablet. "What does it say?" Tara pressed. Linda finally exhaled. "It's from the court." Tara laughed, confused. "Why would the court email us?" Linda's eyes flicked to me. For the first time in years, I saw something I had never seen in her expression. Not arrogance, not boredom. Fear. "Harper," she said, her voice low. "What did you do?" I stood in the doorway, calm, my hands tucked into the pockets of my sweater. "I protected what's mine," I said. Her eyes widened. "What the hell does that mean?" Tara snapped. I took a few steps closer, my cane tapping softly against the hardwood floor. "It means you can't sell what doesn't belong to you," I said. "And it never belonged to you." Tara barked out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You're bluffing. You don't have the guts to fight us." Linda didn't laugh. She was already scrolling through the email again, her lips tightening with every line. "She's not bluffing," Linda whispered. "There's a court order." Tara's face drained of color. What Linda finally read the words out loud, her voice shaking just slightly. "This order prohibits any sale or transfer of the property until ownership claims are resolved. Harper Lane holds majority ownership at 60%. Any attempt to sell or alter the property without her consent will result in legal consequences." She lowered the tablet slowly. Tara stared at her as if waiting for a punchline. But there was none. "You can't do this," Tara hissed at me. "You don't get to just decide what happens." I tilted my head. "Actually, I do. Legally." Tara's hands curled into fists. Linda stayed silent. She wasn't the type to explode. She was the type to simmer, to calculate. "We'll fight this," she said after a long moment, but even she didn't sound convinced. "Go ahead," I said. "You'll lose." I turned and walked down the hallway, leaving their silence behind me. That night, the house felt different. Their laughter didn't echo the same way. The walls didn't feel like they belonged to them anymore. They belonged to me legally and finally. Over the next few days, their behavior shifted. Linda stopped making passive remarks. Tara grew louder and more reckless, her insults sharper but also desperate. She started staying out late and slamming doors when she returned. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Every insult she threw at me was like a stone bouncing off steel. One night, she cornered me in the hallway. "You think you've won?" she said, her breath hot and angry. "This isn't over." I looked at her and answered, "I know it's not. But it's not yours anymore." She shoved past me, but she didn't feel as powerful as she used to. The court documents hung over her like a storm cloud she couldn't outrun. Linda started avoiding eye contact altogether. She spent her nights on the phone whispering to people she thought could help her. But lawyers and real estate agents couldn't change the simple truth. The house was mine. I met with Rebecca again to finalize the next step. She filed additional paperwork to make sure they couldn't take loans or make changes to the property behind my back. Every signature I added built a fortress around the house. They were trapped inside a castle they didn't own. By the end of the week, Linda received the physical notice by mail. I watched from the window as the courier handed her the envelope. Her hand shook when she opened it. Tara stood beside her, reading over her shoulder. I didn't hear the words they exchanged, but I didn't need to. Their faces told the whole story. The foundation they had been standing on for years had just cracked beneath their feet. When I went into the kitchen that night, Tara was sitting at the table with a glass of wine. She stared at me with something between hatred and disbelief. "You think you're clever," she said. "But you're just pathetic." I poured myself some water, my movements calm and steady. "If you really believed that I said you wouldn't look so scared." Her glass slammed onto the table. She wanted a reaction. I gave her none. Linda walked in seconds later looking older than she had in years. "What are you going to do?" she asked me, but this time her tone didn't carry power. It carried something smaller. She finally realized she wasn't in control. I finished my water, set the glass down gently, and looked at both of them. "I'm going to live in my house," I said. "You can either accept that or fight and lose everything faster." I left the kitchen without looking back. That night, I slept without waking once. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one trapped. They were. The night before everything changed, the house was too quiet. It was the kind of silence that did not come from peace, but from fear. The walls seemed to hold their breath the same way Linda and Tara had been holding theirs ever since the court order arrived. I sat in my room with the soft blue glow of my laptop lighting my face. Every piece of evidence I had gathered sat neatly in folders. The legal documents were stacked in perfect order on the desk. The USB drive lay next to them, small and ordinary looking, but I knew it carried every moment that would tear down their lies. Tara thought cruelty vanished in the dark. She never understood that cameras see everything. The footage was hard to watch at first. Every insult, every push, every shove. But the more I watched, the colder I became. My silence was no longer a shield. It was a blade, and tomorrow it would cut through everything they had built. Downstairs, I could hear the soft shuffle of footsteps. Linda pacing again. She had been doing that for days, whispering on the phone to whoever still pretended to listen to her. But there was nothing they could do. The law was already on my side. Their fantasy of Florida beaches was dissolving like snow in spring. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Every second brought me closer to the morning. The plan was simple. Linda had invited neighbors and 2 of her friends for a breakfast gathering. It was supposed to be a celebration of the house sale that would never happen. She didn't know that, instead, it would become the stage for her own undoing. I had placed the mini projector above the mantel in the living room earlier that day. The USB was already connected. At the press of one button, everyone in that room would see exactly what Tara had done. They would see the real story, not the polite facade they liked to paint over their cruelty. They would hear Tara's voice calling me broken. They would see her kicking my leg, shoving my wheelchair, tearing my mother's photograph in half. No one would be able to unsee it. In a small town like this, reputations travel faster than truth, but video travels faster than both. Tomorrow morning, I would not raise my voice. I would not need to. The truth would speak louder than any scream. I walked to the window and looked outside. Snow covered the yard in a white sheet that glimmered under the porch light. My wheelchair sat in its usual place by the steps. I remembered the sound it made when Tara pushed it over that night. I remembered the laughter. It no longer made me tremble. It made me sharper. Tara's door slammed upstairs. I heard her stomping down the hall. She paused outside my room but didn't knock. Her footsteps retreated after a moment. She was restless. She could feel something shifting even if she couldn't name it. Linda tried to act like everything was fine, but she was unraveling too. I could see it in the way she gripped her coffee cup tighter every morning. They were living in a house that no longer belonged to them, pretending they still had control. But tomorrow they would have to face what it meant to lose power in front of everyone they had spent years impressing. I turned away from the window and sat on the bed. The folder of my father's will rested on my nightstand, the same folder I had avoided for so long. It was strange how something that once felt heavy now felt like armor. The memory of his voice came back to me in pieces. The way he always believed in fairness, the way he told me that silence doesn't mean surrender. I didn't believe him back then, but I did now. This house was not theirs. It was mine. Not because they liked it or agreed with it, but because the law said so. And the law doesn't care about their arrogance. It cares about signatures, ownership, and proof. I walked through the hallway slowly, letting my hand graze the wall. This house had been my prison for years, every room echoing with their laughter, their rules, their disdain. But tonight it was mine again. It no longer felt like a cage. It felt like solid ground. In the living room, the table was already set. Linda had laid out plates and silverware, probably trying to convince herself that everything was still under her control. She had even set flowers in a vase. She was still performing, still pretending. She didn't know the curtain was about to drop on her act. I stood in front of the mantel, testing the small remote in my hand. The projector hummed softly when I clicked the button. The frozen frame of Tara's face appeared on the wall. She was mid-smirk, her foot about to hit me. It was the kind of image that burned itself into memory. I clicked the remote again and the screen went black. Perfect. Upstairs, I could hear Tara on the phone with someone. Her voice was sharp and panicked. "She's up to something," she hissed. "I can feel it." She was right. She just didn't know that by the time she figured out what it was, it would already be over. I walked back to my room and sat down on the bed again. The snow outside grew heavier, tapping against the window like a warning. My leg throbbed softly, but it didn't bother me the way it used to. Pain didn't define me anymore. It was simply part of me, like the scar on my knee or the file of legal documents on my desk. I folded my hands in my lap and breathed slowly. Tomorrow morning, they would try to play their usual roles. Linda would smile like a queen. Tara would toss around her cruel jokes to make herself feel bigger. But when the screen lit up, everything they built on lies would collapse in front of their own guests. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of their laughter, not of their silence, not of them. I whispered into the dark room, "Tomorrow it ends." The wind outside howled softly, wrapping around the house like it was listening. Upstairs, a door closed with a hard click. Somewhere in the kitchen, a clock chimed once. It felt like the world itself was counting down with me. I turned off the light, lay back against the pillow, and let the quiet stretch out. Tomorrow would be loud. But tonight, this silence belonged to me. The morning began with the soft crackle of snow under tires as Linda's guests arrived. I heard the sound before I saw them. Vermont winters have a way of making everything sound sharper. Each door slam echoed like a countdown to something inevitable. I sat at the kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee, the steam rising slowly into the cold air. Linda's voice floated through the hallway, overly bright, rehearsed like a stage actress forcing cheer. She welcomed the neighbors' old friends, people she wanted to impress with the image she'd spent years curating. Tara's laughter followed behind, brittle and strained. She was trying too hard. She knew something was wrong. She just didn't know how wrong yet. The living room smelled like cinnamon and expensive coffee. Linda had arranged the plates perfectly, flowers blooming in the center of the table, sunlight filtering through the frosted windows. Everything looked like a picture in a lifestyle magazine, warm and inviting, but the truth lingered beneath the surface like smoke. I rolled my wheelchair out of my room and down the hallway slow and steady. When I entered the living room, heads turned. Linda's smile faltered for half a second before she forced it back into place. Tara leaned against the wall with her arms crossed, pretending to be bored. I caught the flicker in her eyes when she saw the small black remote in my hand. She didn't know what it was, but she knew it mattered. "Good morning, Harper," Linda said sweetly, like a woman auditioning for sainthood. "Join us. I made cinnamon rolls." I gave her a polite smile and positioned myself near the side of the table, facing the blank wall above the mantel. My heart beat steadily in my chest, not fast, not weak. Controlled. The room filled with the sound of polite chatter. One of the neighbors, Mrs. Bennett, complimented the house. Linda glowed under the attention, her smile wide and easy. "We'll be putting it on the market soon," she announced. "Florida's calling my name." She said it like a queen making a proclamation, confident, untouchable. Tara giggled. I let their words hang in the air like smoke. Then I spoke. Actually, I said softly, "You won't." The chatter stopped like someone had flipped a switch. All eyes turned to me. Linda blinked, her hand tightening on the back of a chair. "What was that, dear?" I held up the remote. "You won't be selling this house," I said. Tara's face twisted that nervous half smile that always appeared when she felt cornered. She's just being dramatic, Tara said quickly to the room. She's always like this. Ignore her. Linda opened her mouth, probably ready to say something cutting and polished, but I clicked the button first. The projector hummed softly, and the wall behind me filled with light. The video played instantly. Tara's voice came first, dripping with mockery. "Look at you, broken little Harper!" The image of her kicking my leg flashed across the wall. Gasps filled the room. The sound of the wheelchair crashing against the ground followed. Then, the moment she tore my mother's photograph. It echoed through the house in a way it hadn't the night it happened. No one laughed now. No one looked away. Mrs. Bennet covered her mouth. Someone else muttered something I couldn't make out. Linda stood frozen. Tara went pale. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for someone to defend her, but there was no one left to play that role. Linda finally moved, stepping forward, her voice breaking for the first time since I'd known her. "Turn it off!" she hissed. I clicked the remote again, and the image froze on Tara's smirk, her foot mid-kick. The house fell into a silence so thick it was almost solid. I didn't need to raise my voice. "This is what happens in this house," I said. "While everyone sees flowers and coffee and perfect little brunches, this is what I live with. This is who she is. This is what Linda allowed." Tara stumbled forward. "That's not fair. You're twisting it. It was a joke." A laugh escaped me, then soft and sharp. "A joke, I asked." "Kicking someone's injured leg is a joke. Destroying the last photograph of my mother is a joke. Laughing while I lay on the ground is a joke." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Linda took another step toward me, her mask crumbling at the edges. "Turn it off right now, Harper," she snapped, but the shake in her voice betrayed her. "You're embarrassing yourself." I tilted my head slightly. "No," I said. "I'm just done hiding your mess." Mrs. Bennet's voice cut through the tension, sharp and disbelieving. "My God, Linda, how could you let this happen?" Linda's cheeks flushed deep red. She tried to force a smile, but it cracked immediately. "This is being taken out of context," she said, but no one believed her. The truth didn't need defending. It was written across the wall for everyone to see. Tara turned to the crowd, desperate. "You don't understand." I interrupted. "They tried to sell the house that legally belongs to me. They tried to push me out. But they didn't just do that. They treated me like I was invisible, like I didn't matter, like I was something to be kicked aside whenever it made them feel powerful. This," I pointed to the frozen image, "is the truth of what goes on behind their polite smiles." Tara's face twisted into panic. "You're lying!" she yelled, but the evidence was too loud. Linda's voice finally broke. "Stop it, Harper! Stop this right now!" Her composure was gone. Her voice was sharp and shaking. She was losing control in front of the people whose respect she craved most. The neighbors started murmuring to each other, their eyes hard. Some stepped back as if they didn't want to stand too close to her anymore. That was the moment everything she'd built with her perfect image began to crumble. Tara turned on me, anger replacing fear. "You're pathetic," she spat. "You think anyone cares about your sad little story?" I pressed the remote again. The video rewound slightly to the moment Linda opened the door, saw me on the ground, and turned away. Her betrayal projected in front of everyone. It was quiet, cruel, undeniable. Someone in the room whispered, "Unbelievable!" Linda clenched her fists, but she didn't deny it. She couldn't. The truth was right there. "This house belongs to me," I said clearly. "Legally. My father made sure of it. You've both been living here as if I don't exist." "That ends today," Tara's voice cracked. "You can't just take everything from us." I looked at her calm and unshaken. "I didn't take anything. You tried to take everything from me. All I did was stop you." Linda moved toward me, but it wasn't with power anymore. It was desperation. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "We can work something out." I almost laughed at the irony. They had spent years treating me like I was nothing, and now, faced with their own destruction, they were begging. "No," I said softly. "We can't." The room held its breath again. Tara's eyes darted toward the front door as if she could escape the weight of what she had done. but there was nowhere to run from a reputation shattered in public. Linda turned on her heel, storming into the kitchen. Seconds later, her scream ripped through the house. It was raw, furious, a sound that shook the walls. Everyone heard it. Tara flinched. The neighbors exchanged glances, whispering in disgust. "Get out!" Linda screamed. "Get out of my house!" I rolled my wheelchair forward just a little enough for my voice to carry clearly. "It's not your house," I said. She stopped in the doorway, her breathing loud and uneven. The words landed like a hammer. Tara stood frozen in the middle of the room, shaking. She had always been loud and cruel, but now she looked small. She didn't look like someone in control. She looked like someone who finally understood she had lost. One of the neighbors, Mr. Collins, cleared his throat. "I think we should go," he said to the group. No one argued. One by one, they left their silence heavier than any insult. Linda and Tara were left standing in the ruins of their performance. The perfect image they had spent years maintaining was gone in 15 minutes. When the door closed behind the last guest, Linda leaned against the wall, her eyes glassy with rage. "You'll regret this," she said. Tara was silent, trembling. I met Linda's gaze and replied evenly, "No, I won't." Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the house felt like it was exhaling after years of holding in the truth. I rolled back toward my room without another word. The battle wasn't over yet, but the war had already been decided. The day after the truth spilled across the living room wall, everything shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet in the way a storm feels after it tears through a town and leaves only the sound of broken branches. Linda and Tara moved through the house differently, as if the walls no longer belonged to them. And they were right. They didn't. I woke early to the sound of Linda's footsteps pacing down the hallway. She was on the phone again, whispering in a sharp, urgent tone. I didn't need to hear the words to know what she was doing. She was scrambling. The perfect image she had built for years cracked in front of the people whose opinions she worshipped. She had no script left, no one to charm. Tara hadn't spoken to me since that morning. She stayed in her room most of the day, slamming doors, muttering curses under her breath. But the power she once held over me was gone. Her cruelty had always relied on silence. I wasn't silent anymore. I rolled into the kitchen and made coffee slowly, deliberately. For years, I used to move like a guest in my own home. Now, I didn't. I placed my cup on the table, let the warm steam rise against the cold air, and listened. Linda's voice grew sharper. "We can fix this," she hissed into the phone. But she couldn't. No lawyer in town could rewrite the will. No friend could undo the video. And the neighbors would never forget what they saw. Reputations in small towns don't die quietly. They rot slowly in every whispered conversation at the grocery store, every tight-lipped smile at Sunday brunch. And this time, the rot belonged to them. Linda entered the kitchen with the tight smile she used when she wanted to pretend nothing happened. She didn't say good morning. She just stared at me like I was a problem she couldn't erase. "You've made a big mistake," she finally said. I looked up from my coffee calm. "No, I fixed one." She gripped the counter, her knuckles whitening. "You humiliated us." Her voice cracked on the last word. I held her gaze. "You humiliated yourselves. I just pressed play." Tara stumbled into the kitchen, her hair a mess, her face pale from lack of sleep. She glared at me but said nothing. That silence tasted better than any apology she could ever fake. She poured herself cereal like a teenager pouting after losing a game. Linda cleared her throat, trying to rebuild some kind of control. "We can still sell the house," she said carefully. "We'll find a way around your little stunt." I laughed softly. "There's no way around the law." Tara slammed her bowl on the counter. "You're such a bitch," she spat. "You think you're better than us?" "No," I said simply. "But I'm done being less." Linda snapped at her to shut up, but the damage was already done. That was the thing about power. It's quiet when you have it. When you lose it, everything becomes noise. Later that afternoon, a white envelope arrived in the mail. It was addressed to me. The official court confirmation of ownership transfer and injunction. Legal proof that they couldn't touch the house. I stood on the porch with the paper in my hands, feeling the weight of years lifting inch by inch. Tara walked by, saw the envelope, and froze. "What's that?" she asked. "The end," I said. Her face went white. She backed away without another word. That night, I sat in the living room looking at the fireplace where Linda used to host her little gatherings, bragging about her beautiful home. Now the space felt different, real, mine. I thought about all the nights I'd hidden in my room to avoid their laughter. All the times Tara mocked my limp. All the times Linda pretended not to see. Power had always been in their hands because they believed I'd never fight back. But power doesn't live in the loudest voice. It lives in who owns the ground beneath their feet. Linda tried to regain control the next morning. She knocked on my door at 7 sharp, dressed in her neat beige sweater like nothing had changed. "We need to talk," she said. I opened the door and stared at her. She tried to keep her voice calm, but there was panic under every word. "We don't have to live like enemies," she said. "We can come to some sort of arrangement. You can move out. We can pay you off." "No," I interrupted. "This is my house." She blinked, like no one had ever dared to speak to her that way. "I've lived here for years," she said through clenched teeth. "I built this home." "No," I said. "My father did. You just decorated it." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Tara appeared at the end of the hallway, arms folded, watching like a trapped animal. She wanted to fight, but she didn't know how anymore. The foundation beneath her had crumbled. A week later, the eviction notice came through. Linda and Tara had 30 days to leave the property. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I just sat with the paper in my hands, breathing in the stillness. This wasn't revenge. It was balance. It was the ground finally remembering my name. Tara stormed into the living room when she saw the notice on the counter. "You're throwing us out!" she screamed. "After everything we did for you." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean everything you did to me?" She stepped closer, her voice rising. "You're nothing without this house." I tilted my head calm. "And you're nothing with it." She froze at that, her jaw tightening like she wanted to hit me. But she didn't. She knew better now. Linda came down the stairs, holding the notice like it was a personal betrayal. "You can't just do this," she said weakly. "Your family." I let out a breath. "You treated me like a burden, not family. You let her hurt me and turned your back. You made me feel invisible. And now, you're just seeing the reality you created. This house isn't yours. It never was." For the first time, Linda didn't have a comeback. Her eyes glistened like she wanted to cry, but I had no sympathy left for crocodile tears. She walked away without a word. In the following days, their world shrank. Neighbors stopped visiting. Whispers followed them at the grocery store. The perfect mask Linda wore for so long didn't fit anymore. And Tara avoided my eyes entirely. She was no longer the queen of this house. She was a shadow inside walls she never owned. One evening, I sat on the porch, the same place where it all began. The snow was melting slowly, dripping from the roof. Tara passed by with a duffel bag. She didn't look at me. I didn't stop her. Linda followed a few minutes later, dragging a suitcase. She paused at the door, looking back at me. "You'll regret this," she said softly, but it sounded weak. Not a threat, just a hollow echo of someone who lost everything she thought she controlled. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. They walked down the steps together, smaller than I had ever seen them. The silence that followed their footsteps wasn't lonely. It was clean, sharp, mine. I went back inside and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. The house felt bigger, not because they were gone, but because I was finally standing where I belonged. They had used power to crush me for years. But in the end, power belongs to the one who survives the storm, not the one who causes it. And I survived. That night, I slept without locking the door for the first time in years. When Linda and Tara finally moved out, the house didn't celebrate. It exhaled. For years, the air here felt thick with their control, their voices filling every hallway, every corner. Now the walls felt lighter, as if they too were tired of holding the weight of their cruelty. Their departure didn't come with a dramatic scene. They didn't scream, they didn't beg. They just left quietly, their suitcases dragging across the porch where Tara had once stood laughing while I lay on the ground. That silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard. After they were gone, I spent the first few days just walking through the house. Every creak of the floorboard, every patch of fading wallpaper felt like it belonged to me again. It was strange how different a space could feel without certain people in it. The same walls that had felt like a cage now felt like home. But outside these walls, their world was falling apart. I didn't need to lift a finger. The truth had already done the work. People in this town talk, and when they do, they don't forget. Linda's little circle of friends stopped returning her calls. One of her closest neighbors, who had sat at her table every Thanksgiving, crossed the street to avoid her at the market. Tara was no longer the golden girl she believed she was. Whispers followed her wherever she went. Her name wasn't said with admiration anymore. It was said with a lowered voice, followed by a shake of the head. She kicked Harper, someone whispered once in the pharmacy line. She actually did that. That's all it took. Reputation has its own gravity, and theirs had collapsed. The first week after their departure, I received a letter from the county clerk confirming my sole ownership of the property. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter in my hands, the same kitchen where Linda once ordered me around like a servant. My name at the top of the page felt like something carved into stone. It wasn't just a name. It was everything they tried to take away. My lawyer Rebecca called that afternoon. The injunction held, she said. They didn't contest it. They don't have the funds for a legal fight, and honestly, they wouldn't win even if they tried. It's over, Harper. Over. That word rang through me like a bell. Not because it meant everything was fixed, because nothing ever really is, but because it meant their power over me was truly gone. One evening, a neighbor, Mrs. Bennett, came by with a basket of blueberry muffins. She stood on my porch with an awkward smile shifting from foot to foot. I should have said something, she said quietly. I saw things over the years. I heard things. I'm sorry. I didn't hate her for it. That was how people here operated. They saw, they whispered, but they never intervened. It's done now, I said. She nodded, relieved by the softness in my tone. People are talking, she added. They say Tara's staying with a cousin in Burlington. Linda's trying to find a place, but no one wants to rent to her around here. You know how people are. I did. Small towns never forget. Mrs. Bennett handed me the basket and patted my arm gently. I hope you find peace now, she said. I closed the door after she left and leaned against it for a long moment. Peace. It was a word I'd never associated with this house. But now, maybe it wasn't impossible. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The cold air bit at my skin, but it felt alive. The same porch where I had once been humiliated now felt like a throne carved out of quiet defiance. I didn't have to imagine taking my power back anymore. I already had. But consequences aren't just for those who fall. They ripple. The legal eviction made it into the local paper, a small section tucked into a column about property disputes. They didn't mention the video, but they didn't have to. Everyone knew. People who once ignored me now nodded politely when they passed by. Not pitying nods, respectful ones. That mattered more than I expected. One afternoon, as I was clearing out the last of Linda's furniture, Tara showed up on the porch. She wasn't the same girl who used to strut through this house like she owned the air. She was thinner, her hair pulled back carelessly, her clothes wrinkled. She looked smaller. We stared at each other for a long moment before she finally said, "You ruined everything." Her voice wasn't angry. It was hollow. "No," I said. "You did that all by yourself." Her jaw clenched, but she didn't deny it. "We were supposed to move to Florida," she whispered. "We were supposed to get out of this town." I tilted my head. "You thought you could build a future on top of someone else's pain. You kicked me while I was down and thought the world would never notice. But the world did. And now it's just you and what you did." Her hands shook at her sides. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But sympathy is a luxury for those who never had to survive the things I did. I turned to go back inside, but she spoke again. "You don't deserve any of this," she hissed. I stopped at the doorway. "You don't get to decide what I deserve." I said quietly. She didn't follow me inside. She just stood there on the porch where she had once stood over me. This time she wasn't laughing. She left without another word. Linda tried a different route. She sent a letter a week later. A carefully written plea about forgiveness, about how we can be family again if you let go of the past. I tore the letter in half. Forgiveness isn't something you owe to people who never earned it. Consequences are not cruelty. They're the bill reality sins when you think you can live without paying for your actions. That winter was the quietest of my life. No shouting, no cruel laughter echoing through the hallway, no footsteps pacing outside my room at night. Just the wind, the soft creak of the house settling, and the steady rhythm of my breathing. I began to rebuild. Not just the house, but myself. I cleaned every room, not because it was dirty, but because I wanted to reclaim every inch of space they had occupied. I replaced the old curtains, repainted the living room walls, repaired the porch steps where the wheelchair had once crashed. I planted flowers by the railing, small white winter blooms that could survive the cold. I wanted something beautiful to grow where cruelty had stood. The neighbors started to wave more often when they passed. Some stopped to talk. Mrs. Bennett invited me to join a community gardening group. I said maybe. It was the first time in years I'd said maybe to anything. My lawyer Rebecca called again near the end of January. You could file for damages, she said gently. What they did to you, the harassment, the physical harm, the emotional distress, you have a case. I thought about it. I pictured Linda in court. Tara sitting beside her, their arrogance replaced with panic. It was tempting. But in the end, I told Rebecca no. This was never about money, I said. I just wanted my life back. She understood. She always did. There's a different kind of power in walking away after you've already won. One night, as snow began to fall softly again, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea in my hands. The air smelled like pine and frost. My wheelchair was beside me, the same one Tara had once tried to destroy. I ran my fingers along its handle. It wasn't a symbol of weakness anymore. It was a reminder of everything I survived. I whispered into the night, "This house is mine," not as a declaration, as a truth. And the house, quiet and warm, seemed to agree. It was almost 2 weeks after Tara's visit when the storm hit. Vermont winters can turn in a heartbeat. That night, the snow came in thick and heavy, the kind that swallows sound and light until the world feels smaller. I sat near the window with a blanket around my shoulders, watching flakes drift past the glass. The house was warm and quiet. The fireplace crackled softly, the only heartbeat I needed. I thought of my mother. She used to love nights like this. She said storms were a kind of cleansing, that sometimes the world had to shake itself clean. I didn't know it then, but that night would do exactly that. Around midnight, I heard a faint sound from outside, the crunch of footsteps on snow. My first instinct wasn't fear. It was recognition. The rhythm of those steps, the hesitant pause between each one, felt familiar. I moved to the window and pulled the curtain back. At first, all I saw was the white blur of snowfall. Then, in the distance, the faint outline of a figure near the back fence. Tara. She was wearing a dark coat hood pulled up, her movements clumsy against the wind. She was holding something heavy. I squinted through the glass, trying to make sense of it. The object glinted under the porch light. A metal gas can. My breath caught. For a moment, disbelief anchored me. She couldn't possibly, but she could. This was Tara. The same woman who kicked me while I was down, who laughed while tearing my mother's picture in half. She was capable of anything if she thought it would hurt me. I moved quietly to the back door and locked it. My pulse stayed calm, steady. I reached for my phone and dialed the non-emergency police line. "This is Harper Lane," I said evenly. "My stepsister is trespassing on my property. She's carrying gasoline. I believe she intends to cause harm." The dispatcher didn't waste time. "Stay inside, ma'am. Units are on the way." I stayed by the window, watching. Tara staggered toward the back porch, her steps uneven. She was muttering to herself, the words lost to the wind. She poured a thin line of gasoline along the side of the shed, the liquid gleaming faintly under the porch light. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I just watched, detached, as if I were seeing someone else's nightmare play out. She fumbled with a lighter, trying to strike it against the wind. Her movements grew frantic, desperate. The flames sputtered once, twice, then caught, but the wind was strong. The lighter slipped from her hand and fell into the snow. She cursed, bending down to grab it. The snow had covered part of the gasoline trail, freezing it into a slick layer of ice. Her boot slipped. For one suspended second, she teetered, arms flailing. Then gravity did what karma couldn't rush. She fell hard, her scream slicing through the snowstorm. The lighter hit the ground beside her, the flame dying instantly. The gas can toppled, splashing the remaining fuel across the frozen steps. Tara didn't move. I stared, frozen myself, unable to process the sudden stillness. The world had gone silent again, except for the wind. Within minutes, red and blue lights cut through the snow. The flashing colors reflected off the icicles, painting the night in chaos. Officers moved quickly, shouting commands I couldn't hear through the glass. One of them approached the porch, kneeling beside Tara's body. The radio crackled. Another voice shouted for medical assistance. I opened the door when they called my name. "Are you Harper Lane?" one officer asked. "Yes," I said. "She's my stepsister." "She's alive," he said quickly, "but she's hurt. Likely spinal damage from the fall." "You did the right thing calling us." I nodded the words, feeling distant. Paramedics arrived minutes later, their boots crunching through the snow. They lifted her carefully onto a stretcher. Tara's eyes were open now, dazed and unfocused. For a brief moment, her gaze met mine. There was no hatred in her expression anymore. Just confusion, pain, and something that looked almost like realization. "It hurts," she whispered. I didn't respond. She was carried away into the night, the ambulance lights fading into the storm. I stood on the porch long after they were gone, the smell of gasoline faint in the air. The snow kept falling, covering the dark streaks on the ground, erasing her footprints one by one. By morning, there was no trace of what had happened, except the memory of her scream. The police came back for a full report. They took photos of the spilled fuel, the lighter, the footprints, everything. "It looks like an accident," the officer said finally, "but it's a miracle you called when you did. If she'd lit that gas—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. I knew exactly what would have happened. After they left, I sat by the fireplace again, watching the flames dance. The irony wasn't lost on me. Fire had been Tara's weapon, and in the end, it turned on her. The world has a strange way of balancing itself. Later that afternoon, I got a call from the hospital. A detective wanted to confirm my statement. "She's stable," he said, "but her injuries are severe, partial paralysis likely permanent." I thanked him and hung up. The words echoed in my head, partial paralysis, the same fate she once mocked me for. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat in the stillness and breathed. Karma doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't need applause. It simply arrives when the time is right. A few days later, a letter came in the mail, written in shaky handwriting. It was from Tara. The envelope smelled faintly of antiseptic, the kind hospitals carry. Inside, just one line. "I finally understand what I did to you." No apology, no plea, just those words. I folded the paper and placed it in a drawer. Not forgiveness, not closure, just an acknowledgement that sometimes the world does the teaching for you. In the following weeks, life settled again. The snow melted. The air softened. I repaired the steps where she fell not out of guilt, but because the house deserved better than scars left by hatred. I planted flowers near the porch white daisies that would bloom in spring. Every time I watered them, I thought about cycles of pain, of consequence of release. The neighbors spoke of the incident in hushed tones. Such a tragedy, they said. Terrible luck. But I knew better. It wasn't luck. It was the inevitable end of a story that had been written long before the fall. Linda never came back. She sent one text, a short message filled with anger and denial. "You'll pay for this," she wrote. I didn't reply. Some debts are already settled by the universe itself. A month later, I visited the hospital once. I didn't go inside. I stood across the street watching through the window as a nurse adjusted Tara's wheelchair. She looked smaller, fragile. The arrogance was gone. I thought about the night she called me broken, about the laughter, The cruelty, the way she believed pain could only belong to someone else. Now she knew. I turned and walked away before she could see me. That was the last time I ever saw her. As spring arrived, I opened the windows for the first time in years. Fresh air filled the house, carrying the scent of thawing earth and new beginnings. The porch was alive with color. The flowers had started to bloom. Life had returned to this house in quiet, beautiful ways. One evening, I sat there with a cup of tea, the sunset painting the snow-capped hills in gold. I whispered softly, "Mom, it's over." The wind moved through the trees like an answer. Tara would live, but in a body that would forever remind her of what she'd done. Linda would live too, carrying the weight of her silence. And I would live finally free, finally whole. Justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like balance. Sometimes it looks like peace. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it looks exactly like this. Spring in Vermont has a quiet kind of magic. The snow melts slowly, revealing the dark, damp earth beneath. The air smells like pine and new beginnings. Birds return to the trees, their songs soft but steady, as if the world itself is remembering how to breathe again. I wake up early now, not because I have to, but because I want to. The morning light filters through clean windows, painting the kitchen in gold. There are no footsteps in the hallway, no cruel laughter, no whispers behind doors. Just the house, alive and still. My house. Some mornings I sit on the porch with a cup of tea wrapped in a soft cardigan. I watch the flowers sway gently in the breeze, the same porch where everything once broke inside me. It's strange how the same place can hold both pain and healing, depending on who stands there. The wheelchair sits beside me, not as a symbol of what I've lost, but of what I've survived. I no longer look at it with shame. I look at it like an old friend that carried me through storms no one else saw. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Ownership of the house was fully transferred into my name without contest. Linda never filed an appeal. She disappeared into another town, probably trying to start over. But the thing about small towns is that stories follow you. Tara stayed in a rehabilitation center for months. I never visited. I didn't need to. I didn't wish her pain, but I also didn't owe her my presence. Some scars are meant to be carried by the people who earned them. I began renovating the house in small ways. Fresh paint, new curtains. I replaced the heavy dark drapes Linda loved with light airy ones that let the sun in. I tore down the old wallpaper in the living room and repainted the walls a warm cream. I planted more flowers in the yard, white and yellow, the kind my mother loved. Every nail I hammered and every stroke of paint was a quiet declaration that this space belonged to me now. The neighbors slowly began to speak to me more. At first, it was awkward hellos and careful glances, like they weren't sure how to treat me after everything. But eventually, the tension faded. They brought over pies, invited me to small gatherings, and began to treat me like someone who existed, not like a shadow lingering in someone else's house. That mattered more than I admitted. One afternoon, Mrs. Bennett stopped by with a basket of lemon cookies. She leaned on the porch railing and said, "You look different." I laughed softly. "I feel different." She nodded, her eyes kind. "I'm glad." When she left, I sat there for a long time, letting the breeze wash over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next insult or the next cruel joke. I wasn't bracing for the sound of footsteps outside my door. I was simply existing. Free. Some nights, when the house is quiet and the stars are bright, I take out the photograph of my mother, the one Tara had ripped apart. I had it restored carefully, pieced back together until the lines disappeared into the image. She's smiling in that photo standing on a beach in Maine. I trace the edges of the picture and whisper, "We're home again." And every time I do, it feels real. I know the world isn't perfect. I know there will be hard days again, but this time I'm not the girl sitting in the corner of someone else's story. This time the story is mine. I built it from broken pieces, from silence turned into steel. I didn't win through screaming or rage. I won by standing still long enough for the storm to crash into itself. And when it did, I was still here. Tara's life will never be what it was. That's not my doing. That's the weight of her own choices. Linda's absence isn't a wound. It's air. Open, clean, and quiet. My house no longer feels like a cage. It feels like a heartbeat. On the porch, I sip my tea and watch the world bloom around me. I built something here, not just walls and flowers, but strength. The kind that doesn't shout, but doesn't bend either. The kind my mother carried, the kind Tara could never understand. And maybe that's the real ending, not the scream, not the fall, but the quiet after. The kind of quiet that belongs entirely to me. I whisper softly, "It's over," not because I need to convince myself, but because it finally is. I close my eyes and let the wind carry the words away. The house hums with a stillness I earned, a peace I built, and a strength no one can take again. And for the first time, I smile without the shadow of pain hiding behind it.